here in Red Pill Sunday School. Welcome. You're tuned in to UCY. Thanks so much for joining us today. I will again pass with any pleasantries and get right down to business. I'd like to start today with a little quote. Now, this is a a quote from one of the state constitutions. Yes, you know how much I love that stuff. This happens to be from the state of Nevada's constitution. And I want to read you the first two sections. And I want you to listen very carefully to what is being said. I'm going to read section 2 before I see section 1, because section 1 is what we're going to be talking about today. Section 2, I want you to listen to this, folks. If ever you thought you were free, if ever thought you could succeed, you haven't read your Constitution. What do you think, folks, is the purpose of government? Nevada State Constitution, which is similar to all others, says this. Section 2 says, quote, purpose of government, paramount allegiance to United States. Not the United States, but United States. All political power is inherent in the people. Government is instituted for the protection, security, and benefit of the people, and they have the right to alter or reform the same whenever the public good may require it. Well, doesn't that sound just so romantic? However, let's continue. Quote, but the paramount allegiance of every citizen is due to the federal government, in the exercise of all its constitutional powers, as the same have been or may be defined by the Supreme Court of the United States. And no power exists in the people of this or any other state of the federal union to dissolve their connection therewith or perform any act tending to impair, subvert, or resist the supreme authority of the government of the United States. The Constitution of the United States confers full power on the federal government to maintain and perpetuate its existence. And whensoever any portion of the states or people thereof attempt to secede from the federal union or forcibly resist the execution of its laws, the federal government may, by warrant of the Constitution, employ armed force in compelling obedience to its authority. Now, how can those two statements go together? One, that people can alter or reform what they don't like. Apparently, that's only referring to the state government, or I don't know. And then it tells you that you have no right to do that. How can they contradict themselves? So how does nobody read this? How is it that people still have this delusion that you can secede when the Constitution of the state itself says that if you attempt to secede from the federal union or forcibly resist the execution of the United States' laws, the federal government may, by warrant of the Constitution, employ armed force in compelling obedience to its authority. You know what the average American would say? Well, that's unconstitutional. Did you listen? By warrant of the Constitution? Now, isn't that what we just talked about last show? Yes, by warrant of the Constitution. The war powers given to the president and Congress by the Constitution. And, of course, by the laws of the Congress in the United States. So, again, how many times can we dispel this rumor? In how many ways can we dispel this romanticism of this corporate structure? How many ways can we dispel the way this country works? It is a dictatorship. It is just a dictatorship of many whose voice is one, who delegates their power. Congress delegates that power, makes those laws that we talked about last show, and allows its president, the head of this corporation that Congress created, and just gives it. It's no different than the city giving a city manager all the power. You know, you haven't probably read your city charters, though I recommend that you start reading these things that you're under. Because remember, that's what citizenship is to be, quote unquote, free within the city. Free meaning franchise. So you should really read your charter, especially if it's a city manager and council setup, which most are now, because the council has done similar things as Congress, all councils, which is to give the city manager an unelected official that they hire. So it's essentially like a president, full and utter power in states of emergency. And again, it's always because there's an emergency. When there's an emergency, the council goes and hides away and the city manager takes over. This is how it works, folks. This is how the whole system works. I don't understand how this statement can be sitting there in the state constitution and nobody talks about it. How can nobody be talking about this? Maybe you should be looking in your own state constitutions. Maybe I'll read a new one every week. Just maybe one of these days I'll hit the state that you're living in, you're residing in, even though you're a United States, a foreign citizen. You see, it's all about its continuity, its existence. What did we say the Civil War was about? Continuity of the federal government. Wasn't about slavery. Remember that? A couple shows ago. I hope you guys are listening to these in order. And I hope you're sharing them and telling people that these need to be listened to in order. Now let's go to section 1, because that's what we're going to be talking about. Because I give up if nobody, if anybody still has any type of hope or opinion that we have some kind of constitutional government that is in your benefit. I don't know. I don't know what to say. Anyway, I mean, as long as you sell out to it, yeah, you're great. You stand tall. Section 1. Here's what it says. It says inalienable rights. And this is the subject of the first part of our show today, of our lesson, our lecture. All men, it says, quote, all men. It doesn't say men very often, but in this case it has to, because it's talking about nature. All men are by nature, capitalized nature. That's another word about, that's another way of saying God. All men are by nature free and equal and have certain inalienable rights, among which are those of enjoying and defending life and liberty, acquiring, possessing, and protecting property, and pursuing and obtaining safety and happiness. Gosh, that's again, the romanticism kicks in. It's just written so beautifully. I just really admire the men who wrote this. Well, actually, let's discuss what it actually says, because the first thing it says is inalienable rights. Now, when we look up the definition of terms, because of course, what's the use of reading this unless we understand what those terms actually mean? So, when we look up the term unalienable as opposed to the term inalienable, we find two different things. They're similar in their understanding by the common goyim, but the common goyim has no idea that they have sold all of their rights and accepted false, artificial, legal, political rights in lieu of the fact that as men, by nature, they are free and equal and have certain unalienable rights. But you see, in order to create a government, you must declare that rights are not unalienable. Because you see, if rights were unalienable, that means that they are permanent. They cannot be unrecognized. They cannot be undone. And they certainly cannot be sold by contract. But you see, when you have inalienable rights, that means that, yes, they can be sold. So by declaring that we have inalienable rights instead of unalienable rights as men in nature, they can pluck us out of it. It's really brilliant when you think about it, because everything is based on this one word. If, and I say if, government were to actually recognize every man on earth, regardless of sex, every man, if every man, woman, and child had unalienable rights, do you know that government couldn't exist? There would be no purpose for government because it would have no power. You see, if I have unalienable rights, then my rights can't be sold. I can't be contracted with. I'm untouchable. I cannot volunteer into any system, because in order to volunteer into any system, my rights have to be taken away and replaced with political rights. You see, natural rights are unalienable under God unless you agree to what these state constitutions say, and that is that all your rights are inalienable, i.e. sellable. Now, with that statement, now that we understand Section 1, that all men by nature are free and equal and have inalienable or sellable rights, rights which, if you follow the law of nature, the law of God, then they are unalienable. However, once the devil enters the picture and offers you a contract, that's the only way he can affect you. It, whatever it is, the adversary, whoever the adversary is, in this case, the United States, you cannot be contracted with if you have unalienable rights. I'm telling you, if they were to say unalienable rights, they couldn't do a thing. There's absolutely nothing they could do to you if they recognized you as a man of God, i.e. nature, free and equal with unalienable rights. But since we are fool enough to accept this piece of paper, this Constitution, as legitimate, and because we want the benefits of such a contract with the devils, the evil geniuses, as it's defined, the adversary that Satan is, then we, of course, hand it all over and we accept political rights. And then we complain for some reason when the next sentence basically says we're prisoners here and can't leave, can't secede. We somehow complain that government is acting unconstitutionally. I think it's pretty hilarious myself. I laugh at constitutionalists. I can't help it. It's such an idiocracy out there. It's worse than religion. I mean, it's worse than religion. It is religiosity. It's just patriotism replaced with religiosity. Again, I call it Stockholm Syndrome. And maybe it's guilt. Maybe it's the fact that if you face the truth, you'd actually have to do something about it. Maybe it's more comfortable for people just to keep the delusion going, keep, believing that this thing is more than it is, or better than it is, or more romantic, or even that it's of God. What a joke that is. But let's go. Let's don't take my word for it, because of course we always want to go to the source. We want to know what these words mean as they were written, when they were written. And of course, for that, I always go to Bouvier's 1856 dictionary, because it's specifically, well, let me give you exactly why I go to this, because here's the title of Bouvier's Law Dictionary of 1856, as commissioned and made law by Congress as, quote, adopted to the Constitution and laws of the United States of America and of the several states of the American Union. What else but this would I use to define the intent of these terms as used in the Constitution? Will you who criticize me for my word smithing still actually criticize me when I go to the most respected source that was actually instituted as part of the law, adapted to the Constitution? I mean, what else can I possibly do to appease those naysayers? I don't know. I really don't. It's getting ridiculous. We are, as Jan Irvin was, I was just Skyping with him, and he was saying we're truly entering into, he said, this is the dawning of the age of hilarious. The age of hilarious. That's what we're in, because people have become so ridiculous, so laughable in their rhetoric, with no grammar, just no source, no foundation. And that is what nihilism, i.e. anarchy, really was a goal of the early anarchists, the nihilists. I mean, it worked. It's affecting people in ways. It's created a whole bunch of friends of mine who actually believe in flat Earth. They equate flat Earth with the term flat Earth with a lot of things that have nothing to do with the Earth being flat. And I keep saying, well, don't call it flat Earth then if it's not about flat Earth. If you're talking about geocentrism, don't call it flat Earth. If you're talking about this, don't call it. It's created a mindset of very, very, I don't even know how to, just fallacious thought, unscientific, unfoundational, without any concept of grammar whatsoever. It's turning us into a society that judges not by anything deeper than the prima facie of the appearance of something. What I see is what I believe. And that's a shame, really, because, I mean, think of science, think of the microbes, think of microscopic things, think of air. How much time, how many resources have been put into understanding the way things work that cannot be seen? And yet we're entering into a childish, the age of hilarious, that we are being sort of entrained to just judge things on their appearance. I give you a thumbs up. I gave you 5 stars. Oh, I don't like what you said. I thumb down you. It's I don't have a choice in between. I don't know. It's just we're entering this ridiculousness, and I know a lot of you feel the same way I do, and just want to get the hell out of here. It's like a practical joke being played on us who can see, who have eyes to see and ears to hear, as the Bible says. But let's go to the Bouvier's dictionary term for inalienable and unalienable, or unalienable, depending who unalienable. Pick your English. Let's start with the word alien. All right, one born in a strange country under obedience to a strange prince, or out of the allegiance of the king, i.e., the sovereignty. One born out of the king's sovereignty's dominion or allegiance. A citizen or subject of a foreign state. So you're an alien in whatever state you reside because you're a citizen of the United States, which is in Washington, D.C., outside of the States United. In California, a non-resident alien who may take by secession. You see, that's why they call them non-resident and not non-domicile. Non-resident alien is someone who's there and not a resident. But they're an alien anywhere they go, whereas the United States citizen is a resident alien and therefore can prove domicileship in the United States. So you are a resident alien who may take by succession, is one who is neither a citizen of the United States nor a resident of that state. You see, in California, a non-resident alien who may take by secession is one who is neither a citizen of the United States nor a resident of that state. So we go to alienable. What does it mean to be inalienable or unalienable? Well, what's alienable? First of all, admitting of transfer from one person to another. Inalienable, less frequently unalienable, not subject to transfer or divestment. Inalienable rights are such rights as cannot be bartered, given, or taken away, except. Oh, that's the difference. There's an exception clause. Except in punishment of crime. An unalienable right is one which cannot be surrendered to government or society. What's the difference? An unalienable right is one which cannot be surrendered to government. Government can't take it away. But an inalienable right can be taken away in a punishment of crime. Well, how else? Are you sure it's just with a punishment of crime? Because no equivalent can be received for an unalienable right. That's why it cannot be surrendered. It cannot be traded. It cannot be bartered. In other words, it cannot be sold. And one which neither the government nor society can take away, because they can give no equivalent. Of such is the right of conscience, for instance. So now we have a slight definition of the difference between those terms. Alienage or alienism is, of course, the legal status or condition of an alien. What is an alien born? You'll never guess. The definition of an alien born is a naturalized citizen or subject. Oh, still don't believe you're a resident alien? One who owes allegiance to an adverse belligerent is an alien enemy. We discussed that. What's an alien friend? An alien friend, a citizen or subject of a friendly power. Well, the United States is obviously, quote unquote, friendly to the states, as long as the states obey and stand in obedience. One whose country is at peace with ours. By the common law, a person born within the dominion of the United States is a natural born citizen. Well, that means you're alien born, whatever the status of his parents. An exception is made of the children of ambassadors. An alien born may not purchase lands for his own use, for the king is thereupon entitled to them. One reason is that if he could purchase, the nation might in time become subject to foreign influence. He may require personality, which is of a movable nature. Besides that, trade demands this indulgence. As a consequence, he may maintain actions concerning personality and dispose of it by will. An alien enemy, however, has no rights unless by the sovereign's special favor. By the common law, an alien may take lands by purchase, though not by descent. And there's the big difference. Remember, we're always talking about the difference between a legal entity and a man. An alien may take lands by purchase. You may take lands by getting a mortgage, forming a corporation, etc., getting a title. However, it's not a perfect title. It never will be. Because you're an alien. You're not part of the state. You're not a citizen of the state, though not by descent. In other words, your bloodline. You remember, you're not bearing the arms of your family. You're bearing the arms of your false artificial father or God, which is the United States. In other words, while he cannot take by the act of the law, he may take by the act of the party. So you can't take by law. Law recognizes the blood, but you can act in commerce. And you can use your United States person, which is property of government, that status, to purchase land. But he has no capacity to hold lands like private people do, and they may be seized into the hands of the sovereign. I think we've now covered that in triplicate. Until so seized, the alien has complete dominion over them. In this regard, alien friends and alien enemies are alike. The title is divested by office found. Disabilities as to holding realty have been removed in the states. At common law, an alien is protected in his person. Not a man, the person, the status, as to such property as he may own, that is, the person owns, in his relative rights and in his reputation. In return for protection, he is required to pay taxes. He cannot become president, nor in some states, governor. 7 years after he has been naturalized, he may be elected to Congress. Unnaturalized, he could not be adjudged a bankrupt. He cannot take out a copyright, nor can he exercise any political right. So you see the difference between naturalized and unnaturalized, alien enemies and enemy friends. You're friends as long as you cooperate, folks. Another way to speak about the notion of unalienable rights given by God, i.e. the God-given rights that are spoken about in the Declaration of Independence. As unalienable rights, these are called negative rights. Now, I've spoken about the difference between negative and positive rights before, but I think it's apropos that we do it again. Because, you see, when you have a negative right is a right of nature. In other words, it's unalienable, of course, unless you agree that it's sellable. But, I mean, the whole concept of this, the whole idea of a religious life and living by the law of God is that you never ever sell yourself up to mammon, to the god of fiction. You just don't do it. You never ever put yourself in a position where you're signing a contract under someone else's name as surety for it. You just all these are against the thing. Surety is a no-no. Those who are in surety will smart for it. Who are surety for another will smart for it. Be put in pain for it, in other words. And remember, it's your right to be put in pain, according to U.S. code. So we've got to understand the difference between the negative and the positive. In order for government to function, it must take the negative rights of men, turn them into positive rights. Positive right is something that is declared. It doesn't exist in nature. That's why it's positive. It's something added to that which is of the, if you will, negative. Negative has a sort of a different meaning in that respect. It means something that already exists. It is something that is self-evident, that cannot be questioned. But unfortunately, these devils that we call the founding fathers, that we call the governors, that we call the states, the people, they have offered to give us certain benefits and rights and protections and securities if we agree to sell and give up those negative or unalienable rights, and agree that they're inalienable, which means sellable, and thus take the rights granted as positive rights, artificial rights, legal rights, legal meaning anti-God or anti-nature, anti-reality, something that is not self-evident instead. And that's how the whole system works. Without this structure, without this notion of inalienability and unalienability, without this, the whole thing would not exist. And really, this is the key to everything. This is the foundational trip that man makes by stepping out of his true self, his nature, and accepting the property, the status, i.e. the citizenship of another. And that's really the first and fatal step that we take. And of course, that's done for us by our parents at birth. So it's really a step that we don't even know we're taking until it's too late. So to be clear, I was just reading from W.C. Anderson's 1889 dictionary. Let's go to the source. Let's go to Bouvier's Law Dictionary. What is the term inalienable defined as in this dictionary? Well, inalienable, this word is applied to those things. Remember, the word res in resident is a thing. The word is applied to those things, the property of which cannot be lawfully transferred from one person to another. Okay, well, that sounds good, doesn't it? Public highways and rivers of this kind. There are also many rights which are inalienable, as the rights of liberty or of speech. So what did we just read? Because this is actually quite deceiving. The word is applied to those things, the property of which cannot be lawfully transferred from one person to another. Well, okay. How about illegitimately? Because the United States is illegitimate, of course. So how see, what it's saying is that the property of a right cannot be lawfully transferred. So in this way, inalienable and unalienable are synonymous, right? But when you're talking about something that is a property, it can be contractually transferred. Now, let's compare that to unalienable. Unalienable is defined as the state of a thing or right which cannot be sold. Now, why didn't he say that for the term inalienable? Why wasn't it stated that that thing, that property of the right? See, it's different. See, this is talking about the actual right, but that was talking about the property of the right. And there's a big difference between those two things. And see, that's why it is so important to keep it real. Never let a right that is God-given and self-evident become something that is a positively written thing. Something that is unwritten is what we call the negative or God-given law. Something that is written is always a positive law of man. It gets a little confusing, but once you get it, oh boy, do you get it. The state of a thing or right which cannot be sold. What was the difference? The other thing could not be lawfully sold. Yeah, it's not like the United States in any way, shape, or form acts lawfully, as we've uncovered. 2, continuing with unalienable, it says things which are not in commerce, as public roads, are in their nature unalienable. Some things are unalienable in consequence of particular provisions in the law forbidding their sale or transfer as pensions granted by the government. The natural rights of life and liberty are unalienable. All right, so we're starting out here. See, because this was written for Congress, it's coded. You have to know what you're reading to understand what it's saying. The difference between these two, and the difference is quite obvious if you start looking at court cases and everything else. So let's look at some other definitions of this, either from the courts or from other law dictionaries. For instance, let's go to Black's Law Dictionary. In the 4th edition of Black's Law Dictionary, we have inalienable, not subject to alienation. The characteristic of those things which cannot be bought or sold or transferred from one person to another, such as rivers and public highways and certain personal rights. For example, liberty. Okay, so what did we just read here? Not subject to alienation. You see, again, very tricky. You have to understand what's being said here. Okay? What is an inalienable right? Why did it say that men have inalienable rights? That means that you have the choice to sell them or not. That means that you're not subject to alienation. It's not mandatory. It's not required of you. You must voluntarily accept subjugation to government, and that's what they call you. They call you a subject, just like the Queen of England calls her people her subjects. Right? We're called subjects of the United States. See, when you're not subject to alienation, then you're in a state of unalienability. When you sell that choice, when you give that choice up and you say, yeah, I want those benefits, well, then all of a sudden, now you're subject. Now you're subject. All right. What does it say about unalienable? Unalienable says inalienable or incapable of being aliened. That is, sold and transferred. Incapable of being aliened. What's the difference? What's the difference between those two statements? Something that is incapable of being aliened, that is sold or transferred. If it's incapable, again, well, what would government do? They couldn't get you to sign any contracts and give up your rights and accept artificial rights, right? And certainly its legal rights could never oppose your natural rights. So it has to convince you of your inalienability so that you will sell. You notice the other definition didn't say that it was incapable of being aliened or sold or transferred. It said it was not subject to alienation. So there's your difference again. It's subtle. It's hard to grasp at first sight, but yeah, there it is. Now we go to some, let's say, how about some court cases that explain this a little better. You know, there's a Latin maxim of law that probably should be read here as well. And I want you to listen to this very carefully, folks, because remember that anything that is created for your benefit, made in your benefit, that includes any law, you have the right to rid yourself of that benefit. If a benefit is created for your behalf, you have the right to get rid of it. Now, this particular one is very important because it has to do with your children. Here's what it says. It says, one may relinquish for himself and his heirs, i.e. your children, a right which was introduced for his own benefit. One may relinquish for himself and his heirs a right which was introduced for his own benefit. Well, by declaring that your rights are inalienable, you have the right to sell those rights. That's all it's saying. If your rights were unalienable, you wouldn't. It's real simple. Now, it's interesting to note that Jefferson's original draft of this phrase in the Declaration of Independence was actually written, "We hold these truths to be sacred and undeniable, that all men are created equal, all men are created equal and independent, that from that equal creation they derive rights inherent and inalienable, among which are the preservation of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." That was actually the original draft. Of course, we're used to the one that says, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness," in the Declaration of Independence in the second paragraph. So that was the original, if you will. Members of the Declaration Committee of the Continental Congress that had been selected to write the document included Benjamin Franklin and John Adams, who had different beliefs. The word inalienable was changed to unalienable and read what we just read. You cannot surrender, sell, or transfer unalienable rights. They are a gift from the Creator to the individual and cannot under any circumstances be surrendered or taken. All individuals have unalienable rights. That should read, all men have unalienable rights. Individual is a legal term. What it refers to is the private man, one who's not been sold out. You can surrender, sell, or transfer inalienable rights if you consent either actually or constructively. Inalienable rights are not inherent in man and can be alienated by government. Persons have inalienable rights. That's persons. Most state constitutions recognize only inalienable rights. So if you read any state constitution, folks, it's essentially going to say that all men have inalienable rights. Now, again, different court cases. We can go to Morrison versus State, MO.APP 252, SW2D 97101, on page 683. Inalienable rights. Rights which are not capable of being surrendered or transferred without the consent of the one possessing such rights. Did you hear that? There's that exception clause again that we found in every constitution, right? Except without inalienable rights, or rights which are not capable of being surrendered or transferred, just like unalienable rights, except without the consent of the one possessing such rights. So as long as you consent, see, I think it's a consensual game. That's all it is. I'll have to have your consent. That's why it's voluntary. Black's Law, in the 5th edition, defines unalienable as inalienable or incapable of being alienated, that is, sold or transferred. So you see, when the court looks at it, it says, well, that doesn't mean that someone can't consent to it. We have to get these people into our system, right? Into our global system. So with your consent, inalienable rights can be sold. Inalienable rights are nothing more or less than unalienable rights as recognized by these evil motherfuckers. In U.S. versus Cruikshank, 92 U.S. 542 in 1875, the very highest duty of the states when they entered into the Union originally under the Constitution was to protect all persons within their boundaries in the enjoyment of these unalienable rights with which they were endowed by their Creator. So here we go. There you go. I'm not just rhetoricizing here. When they say unalienable, they say of God, of their Creator, right? But that was at the beginning. That was before all of this commercial stuff, all this maritime law got forced over the land. So we keep going. Now we go to 1956. United States versus Twin City Power Company, which is a person at law, 350 U.S. 222 in 1956. The first 10 amendments to the Constitution, adopted as they were soon after the adoption of the Constitution, are in the nature of a Bill of Rights and were adopted in order to quiet the apprehension of many, and that's, of course, of many private citizens of the states, that without some such declaration of rights, the government would assume and might be held to possess the power to trespass upon those rights of persons and property, which by the Declaration of Independence were affirmed to be unalienable rights. So again, we're talking about the history here. The traditional American philosophy teaches that man, the individual, is endowed at birth with rights which are unalienable because they are given by his creator. This governmental philosophy is uniquely American. The concept of man's rights to be, and man is capitalized, the concept of man's rights being unalienable is used solely upon the belief of their divine origin. Lacking this belief, there is no moral basis for any claim that they are unalienable or for any claims of the great benefits flowing from this concept. God-given rights are sometimes called natural rights, those possessed by man under the laws of nature, meaning under the laws of God's creation and therefore by gift of God. Now, you folks, again, if you don't believe in God, if you don't believe in the nature of existence itself, I can't stop you. I can't stop you from being a nihilist. Or you want to call yourself an atheist, which means you don't believe in the existence of existence. Okay, i.e. God, that's fine. I'm not going to stop you, but you've got to understand that you're under a system of people who have based this whole thing on that fact. So whether you believe it or not, you have to accept it. So, I mean, why are you in a system that believes in God and bases its entire law structure on God and the idea of God-given natural rights if you don't believe in God? Get the hell out then, right? Be the atheist anarchist that you're supposed to be, right? But don't sit here and say there's such a thing as natural rights. The whole idea of natural rights is based on God. You see, without that notion of God, the whole thing doesn't work. See, and that's the big problem with atheism, is that you purport that there are laws of nature. You purport that there is some design and something called natural rights, and yet you refuse to acknowledge that that is the design of nature. I mean, you're denying that nature is God, or God is. It's just incredibly stupid, this concept of atheism. But then I keep in mind, I'm also saying that it's incredibly stupid, this idea of Christianity, which takes God and externalizes it from nature. So I'm not saying either one is right. I'm saying you got to come down to earth, get down to God, down to nature, and say, okay, this is where I'm supposed to be. The laws of nature, the natural laws, the natural rights are of nature. God, nature, they're interchangeable terms. Man has no power to alienate, to dispose of, or by surrender, barter, or gift his God-given rights, according to the American philosophy. This is the meaning of unalienable. An endless list of rights to attempt to name all these rights, starting with life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, mentioned in the Declaration of Independence, would be to start an endless list, which would add up to the whole of man's freedom from government over man. They would add up to the entirety of individual liberty against government over man. You want to hear some of those? Right of freedom of choice, right of privacy, right to travel without restrictions, license, seatbelts, regulations, right to not be trespassed upon, right to life, right to die, right to liberty, right to pursuit of happiness, right to acquire, possess, enjoy, protect, and dispose of your property consistent to your happiness, right to individual sovereignty. We understand what that means. That means that God is your sovereign and you follow only its rule. Right of self-rule, right to not pay any direct taxes, excise taxes, or indirect taxes, right to contract, right to earn a living using one's own labor, right to assemble, right to free speech, right to personal security, right to worship, right to free press, right to be free from invasion, right to not be held in bondage or slavery or servitude, right to not be a witness against yourself, right of redress, right to a speedy jury trial by your peers, not strangers, right to decide the law. If the laws are good or bad, which is called jury nullification, right to vote, right to due process, right to allodial title if your property untouchable, right to remain anonymous, right to sanctuary in our private property, right to disobey any laws, acts, codes, ordinance, penalties, fines, fees, licenses, permits, at all which are repugnant to the higher founding and fundamental laws of the land, right to a self-preservation of yourself, your family, and your private property, right to hunt without restrictions, permits, or harassment on public property, right to be secure in your person, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable search and seizure, right to individual responsibility, right to association, expression, to conceive and bear children, to provide physical care and discipline to your children. Shall I go on? Right to proselytize, right to alter, abolish, and institute a new government when any form of government becomes destructive of your own unalienable rights, right to keep and bear arms, right to self-defense, right to a well-regulated militia, not a standing police state, right to a free choice, right to free will, right to try, right to buy, right to sell, right to fail, right to be informed of any taking or accusation against our private and public property, right to be confronted with the witness against you. Gee, does the stop sign come to court? Does the stoplight come to court? No. All these are in fictional things. Right to counsel, right to common law, right to natural law, right to natural rights, right to God's law, right to rebel from government tyranny, right to independence is defined in the Declaration of Independence, right to be free is defined in the intent of the American Revolution. Right to no excessive bail or excessive fines, nor cruel and unusual punishments inflicted, which is the entirety of our system, and the private prison system. Do you know that products that are made in federal prisons have the Made in America stamp on them? Right to be left alone. That's your negative rights. Remember, these are all negative rights. Right not to be compelled to perform through adhesion, coercion, force, or tyranny. Right to total transparency in government. Right to not harbor any state enforcement types on your property, right to have all your individual unalienable rights protected at any cost, right to marry without license and regulations, fees, etc., right to self-determination, right for peace, and the right to defend yourself. That's a list created by Jack Venrick of Enumclaw, Washington. Your certain enumerated unalienable rights. Yeah. How many of those apply to you, folks? How many of those actually apply to you? Not very many of them in the legal system we're in. The Ninth Amendment, of course, states the enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed to deny or disparage others retained by the people. Now, remember, if something is retained, it's not sold. So it's unalienable, or, inalienable, still sellable, but hasn't been sold yet. Okay, so what's the difference between the certain rights of these private people? Well, they haven't sold themselves out to the United States. They're not United States citizens. They're landholders, and they claim those negative rights. Of course, we have to consider what we've been reading, which is the constitutions, the state constitutions, and the notion that we're under a civil war that never ended. So we have to consider that. The one thing about being one of these private people is you still have to pledge your allegiance to the United States. You have to pledge your allegiance to the state and, of course, agree that you can have your land taken, etc., under eminent domain, and that you can't secede from the Union. So it's not like they're free. They're just private, and they've retained their rights, i.e. their rights are unalienable from the United States. But remember, the United States can... it's a wash, because the United States can then suspend the Constitution, as we discussed last week, at any time it really wants to. If there's an emergency, bam, it's gone. Again, if you haven't listened to our previous shows, you're probably going to get lost here. So the important part about this is this very important court ruling, which says inalienable rights are rights which are not capable of being surrendered or transferred without the consent of the one possessing such rights. You see, when they put that exception clause, as long as you are consenting to it, then you can have those rights taken away. So they're not unalienable. Again, when you read these state constitutions, they're all going to say the same thing. And as we've talked about with the birth process, the birth certification process, where the seal of the United States is stamped upon and the status is created, a legal entity is created, a ship, a vessel that you thus hop aboard and sail the rest of your life. It's everything is attached to. See, nothing is attached to you. You're surety for that person. Everything is attached to the person. The law is attached to the person. Social Security is attached to the person. The status, your house, your car, everything you purchase and register, anything you register, your children. You see, and that's why you have no control, because you're not the creator. Government is the creator, the God of its own creation. And remember, the maxim of law, you can't forget this maxim of law. It's the most important one. It simply says the creator controls. The creator controls. 3 words that should never get out of your head. The creator controls. Who's your creator? You can say God, but if you're acting in citizenship to the United States, well, then, unfortunately, you're incorrect. Your creator, your person's creator, is government. You know, what the Bible says as well. I was having this discussion today, in fact, with a friend, and I said, look, folks, let's again admit our defeat. Let's admit, you know, if you're a citizen, you're a citizen. If you've got a driver's license, if you've got a home, registered car, children, if you're married, anything that you are using that signifies that you are this person with this Social Security, this address, this phone number, whatever it is, if it's in that person, that property of the United States, then you are in mammon. You cannot be in God or mammon. What does the Bible say? What does Christ say? It is better to be cold than lukewarm. What does it mean by that? It means, hey, when in Rome, you might as well do as the Romans do. It is foolish for us to keep pretending that we are something we are not. So here's the deal. You know, I was having this conversation today, in fact, with with Jan. We were joking that if we were to tell ourselves 6 years ago what we're saying now, what we understand now, if we were to go back and tell ourselves incognito, we would have argued, we would have just done everything we could to resent and pretend like, no, you're wrong. You know, everything that we've learned spiritually in our growth, we are now just amazed at the things we say, because when you find the truth, you're not afraid anymore to say these things. You don't care what people say about you. Of course, you care, but you don't let it stop you from spreading the truth. It can't be, you know, truth is never offensive. That's how you know it's truth. If the truth is offending you, well, then you've got a serious problem on your hands, because you're not living in reality. And that's why most people can't accept the truth, because nobody's living in reality. They're all living in this simulation. They're living in dissimulation, which means a bad appearance, an appearance of something else. It's an interesting word. It's one of the foundations, the principles of this whole system. And that is dissimulation. Dissimulation, remember, dis was the name given by Dante to the devil in the Bible. Anything that starts with disassociation, disguise, disharmony, this, that. It's all bad, right? It's all something that is detached. So dissimulation is different than simulation. Simulation, you're trying to actually copy something, but dissimulation, what does that mean? It means you're being a person. It means you're being something you're not. It means you're not simulating. You're actually trying to escape your true self and be some title, some fiction in mammon, in the legal system. that's everything's based on that. You got the time domain, you've got the dissimulation or the appearance, the fiction, the character, right? You've got mammon, valuation, in other words. Those are the three pillars, and I know there's a fourth one I can't think of. There's a series I'm writing, the four pillars of fiction: time, dissimulation, valuation, and something else. I can't remember. I'll have to figure that one out. I don't know if I have a name for it yet. But, here's what I was saying, that when I was going through the Bible, I was going through all these concordances. I was looking and deciphering the cipher and ciphering the decipher. I was amazed that every time the word fool or idiot, or there's even one case where it says the dumb ass will do this, and which became my favorite word from that point. If God could say it, then so can I. I was like, wow, every time the word fool comes up, it's speaking of a path or an action that someone does, or a disbelief in something that is real, which is ridiculous. And I realized I was the fool. Every single time I was like, oh shit, that's talking about me. Oh man, that's talking about me. Oh, that's me. Wait, every time this happens, every time Jesus says the fool do follow this path, damn, that's me again. And that's part of the spiritual enlightenment. That's part of the spiritual awakening, is the realization that you're the problem. No one else is the problem. You're the one not following the law. You're not the one not living in self-evident truth. You're not living in nature. You're not living a true and happy life. And I heard an interesting question today. I want you to think about this, folks. If in the job you are doing today, in the job you're hired and paid to do today, would you do that job if you weren't paid? Because how do you really know you're in spiritual descent, spiritual trouble? I would say that that's probably one of the biggest ways of knowing, is if you wouldn't do your job as a charity, then you're probably doing the wrong thing. You're acting against the laws of nature. Just a thought. Just a thought. Immediately apparent from the declaration is a recognition of the laws of nature and of nature's God. This speaks of fixed, uniform, and universal rules of action established by God. The laws of nature and of nature's God are the source of the unalienable rights of mankind. Civil governments are bound to secure those rights, including property. And so, in this quote, we find that there is a duty and honor-bound requirement of government to uphold the unalienable rights. You see, unless you consent to selling those rights, which the private people have retained, well, that means, all these things that affect us don't affect them. See, that's the big difference. This is why I want to start a community of people who refuse to sell their rights anymore. I take them back, start a new place without money, without any this property and stuff, if only to live together in peace and harmony without property. I know that sounds so foreign to people, but of course that's your ingrained nature. I can't really change too much about this. I do want to read one last quote here before moving on to the source of all of this. Where did this concept come from of inalienable rights? Well, two quotes. Van Hoon's Lisi versus Dorrance. This is Justice William Peterson. One encroachment leads to another. Precedent gives birth to precedent. That's i.e. the decisions of courts. What has been done may be done again. Thus, radical principles are generally broken in upon and the Constitution eventually destroyed. Where is the security? Where is the inviolability of property if the legislature, by a private act affecting particular persons only, can take land from one citizen who acquired it legal and vest it in another? That's a good question. There's also a common concept that it's an unknown source, but the quote is that what God hath given, man cannot take. Now, the quote I want to read is from Dr. Eduardo M. Rivera. His website is Ed Rivera, and he says, all the wonderful rights God gave you are called unalienable rights in the Declaration of Independence. So whose idea was it to put them to a vote? The Assembly of Lawyers and other scoundrels, otherwise known as the Constitutional Convention, knew the unalienable rights of the Declaration of Independence stood in the way of a strong central government. The so-called Founding Fathers dispensed with them by making them subject to the mob democracy. I agree with Mr. Rivera. Absolutely 100%. They knew that unalienable rights, as written in the Declaration, cannot stand. And don't think that the Declaration has any backbone. It has nothing to do with anything. It's not law. It's just a declaration. Again, it was the idea of the time. It wasn't original. There was nothing great about it. It was just what was, or it was not an original. It was just what the contention of the time was after the revolutions in France, etc. So don't, again, I should read that quote. Maybe I'll read that sometime if I can find it. That quote from, I believe it was from Washington who said that. It's like, hey, it's not that special. It's just the talk of the time. It's the public opinion. That's all. we're just putting it down on paper. But you see, again, instead of inalienable, you said unalienable. And that is a huge problem, stood in the way of the strong central government, as they said, because government couldn't do it. What can they pass? What law can they pass if you have unalienable rights? If you're not willing to volunteer and sell your rights, what can they possibly do? It means you wouldn't accept their positive rights. You'd be retained under the negative law, the natural law, the law of God. Even the deist Thomas Paine, he said, the question before the human race is whether the God of nature shall govern the world by his own laws, or whether priests and kings shall rule it by fictitious miracles. That's in a letter to Thomas Jefferson, June 20th, 1815. Now, the problem with deism, which is a logical sort of conclusion of the oncoming of the scientific inquiry, if you will, that happened in the 1700s, 15, 16, 1700s, of course, is to detach God from nature. And that indeed is what is said to be the difference between a deist and a Christian. Is most deists believe that God created the universe and then somehow disassociated himself with his creation. And this is where a lot of the fundamentalist type of modern Christianity comes from, is this detachment of God from nature. And that's very important to get around, because that is not how God is defined at all in the concordances in the Bible. There's no suggestion in any other religion even that God is somehow detached from creation, that creation and God are essentially a living being. It's a living entity, a living creation, the living God, as they call it. So the notion that that God is a king ruling over is actually very much the notion of a priest or king or a pope ruling over God's creation. Man is God. Again, it's a very dangerous line of thought. It only became about by the modern science, medicine, chemistry, physics, astronomy, mathematics, Isaac Newton's Principia Mathematica, which stated that the universe could be explained completely through the use of mathematics. Oh, okay, so I can simply write a few numbers on a page, well, quite a few numbers and symbols on a page, and I've just explained God. That's pretty important, right? Because God is defined as the universe. Wow, Isaac Newton, you're special. So, yeah. Anyway, but at some point we have to say, okay, where did this all come from? Where did these concepts, how did the concept of inalienability come? I mean, how is that, what's going on? Well, I'm just going to come out and say it. I think it's a trick. I think that there are two versions of what we call the natural law or the law of nature. Now, I want to try to explain this because I think this is ultra important, because I think there's a lot of confusion out there. People seeking a meaning for the concept of the law of nature, which is God's law. Well, let me put it to you this way. There's natural law and there's the law of nature. When we go to the dictionary, again, because I want to know what government thinks. I don't want to know what you think. I don't want you to know what I think. I want to know what government recognizes as the law of nature. Because that's really all we're concerned with in our little venue here. That's what we're trying to find out, is how government views the concept of what it referred to as unalienable rights. That is natural rights, rights which cannot be taken or sold, and then did the old switcheroo. Because you see, if all the people in the state have inalienable rights, that means they have the choice to sell their rights or not. Some stayed private because they knew the game, they knew the gig, they knew they were landholders. They couldn't hold land if they were public. So, of course, they retained their rights. They are the ones who have constitutional rights. All of us who are federal citizens, we sold. We acknowledged the false notion that we have inalienable rights, that we can sell our rights, that our rights are actually property to be traded, when in fact we know that that is absolutely an incorrect assessment of something that is given by God. No, you don't give away what is given by God. You don't give away what is nature. You don't patent it. You don't make it property. It is God. You don't, it's not our property in the first place. And this is the important part. That is the difference between what is the law of nature, because when you say of, when something is of something, that means it belongs to something. The United States of America. You see, of, belonging to. You can look that up yourself. So when we hear the word of, it means it comes from that thing. You cannot go higher than that thing. So when we say the law of nature, what we're really saying is the law of God. That's why they're called natural rights. At the same time, they're called God-given rights. You see, this is only reasonable. It's logical. You don't have to look at it or be offended by it if you're a religious fundamentalist. It is, I mean, truly, you must understand this, or you're just going to continue to be a religious fundamentalist or a complete anti-religious freak, and you're never going to get anywhere in this society because you're not attempting to understand the enemy. And the real truth of the matter is that if you're voluntarily ignorant of this stuff, then you are your worst enemy. To know yourself is to know your enemy. So let us look at the history of how this concept happened, because again, the law of nature is set in stone. It cannot belong to anything else because it belongs to or is of nature. It cannot be altered or changed. And that is why they call Jehovah the unchangeable God, as opposed to something that we call natural rights. Natural rights doesn't say it belongs to nature. And believe me, when these folks in higher places use the word natural, it does not mean what you think. In fact, let's verify that. When government in their legal language uses the word natural, it cannot, let me just put it the other way, it cannot refer to anything in nature, because there is nothing of nature in the legal fiction. Fiction is not real. Okay? So it cannot be anything but fiction. When they say natural life, they're referring to the period between birth and natural death, as distinguished from civil death. When they say a natural infancy, they're saying a period of non-responsible life, which ends with the 7th year. You can, of course, prosecute, and this is why that magic number of 7 is what the Pope and what Loyola and what the Masons say, give me a child until the age of 7. This is what I think Lenin or one of those Red Revolution guys said, give me a child until he's 7 and I will give you a Bolshevik or a a Catholic or whatever, because that is a universally recognized age of basically impressionism. That's why they call it natural. It means idiocracy. It means gullible. A natural child. What does it mean for a child to be a natural child? Well, in government's view, that means a child that was born out of marriage, naturally. Oh my God, that's disgusting, right? In Brave New World, ooh, you had a natural child. Well, yeah, natural child is in Black's first edition of the dictionary is a bastard, a child born out of lawful wedlock. That's a natural child. Illegitimate children who have been adopted by the father are natural childs. Natural persons are such as formed by nature as distinguished from artificial persons, corporations, formed by human laws for purposes of society and government. What is a person? Something formed by human laws. Naturalize. What does it mean to naturalize? Does it have anything to do with nature? No. It means to confer a status or citizenship upon an alien. What is naturalization? Does it mean bringing you into nature? No, it's quite the opposite. It means bringing you out. It means adopting an alien into a nation, clothing him with all the rights possessed by natural-born citizens. Those are political rights, not natural rights. A naturalized citizen is one who, being an alien by birth, has received citizenship, i.e. legal status, under the laws of the state or nation. He's received a persona. What's a natural death? The only reason they define natural death as they do is because they must distinguish, as it says, as distinguished from civil death, which is the loss of rights and juristic personality as a legal consequence of certain acts. So what is natural death? Death resulting from disease or from natural forces without the concurrence of man's agency. Physical death, in other words, a separation of the soul and body, but only defined that way so as to say as distinguished from civil death. Now, we have natural law. Is natural law the same as the law of nature? Well, let's read and find out. Before we do that, let's what about natural liberty? The power of acting is what one thinks fit, without any restraint or control, unless by the law of nature. Well, law of nature, it didn't say natural law, it said law of nature. Natural rights are those which are plainly by reason assured by natural law, such as the right to life, to personal liberty. Well, that time it used the term natural law. How do we distinguish between the two? It says plainly by reason assured by natural law. It didn't say by the law of nature. Is there a difference? One which lacks a natural obligation is one which lacks legal sanction and therefore cannot be enforced in a court of justice, but which imposes a moral duty upon the person bound. Now notice that government can't enforce moral duties. It can only enforce legal sanctions. Sanction is a punishment, a consequence. But if you have a moral duty, government says, hey, we're not in that business. Morals are painful to us. Please keep them out of my court. We're strictly administrative here. What is your nationality? A quality or character which arises from the fact of a person's belonging to a nation or state. Belonging to. You're a person of the United States. What does that mean? A person belonging to the nation or state. Nationality determines what? The political status of the individual, especially with reference to allegiance, which we covered, while domicile determines your civil status. Nationality arises where? Well, of course, by birth or by naturalization. Nationality is also said to be opposed from territoriality, for the purpose of distinguishing the case of a nation having no national territory, like the Jews. Now, what is the difference between territory and nationality? If I say I'm from the territory, well, then I'm from the state. If I say I'm from the nationality, well, then I'm in the jurisdiction of the United States. I'm from Washington, D.C. That is the difference between state lands and national lands, or public lands. Public lands are national. State lands are territorial. Where do the private people live in the territory that was made into the states. Where do the public people live? In the nation. In the area that is said to be part of the nation. Federal lands. Federal areas, as they call them. Natural law is the rule or dictate of right reason, showing the moral deformity or moral necessity there is in any act, according to its suitableness or unsuitableness to a reasonable nature. One thing that is missing in this place we all live is reason. Reason is said to be the brightest light of God, according to some of these old writings. This expression, natural law, or jus natural in Latin, was largely used in the philosophical speculations of the Roman jurists of the Antonian age. That's where the natural law comes from. Although it came before that, of course. But you see the difference between natural law and the law of nature here, because natural law does not say it belongs to nature or belongs to God. It is natural. See, again, it's very tricky and very difficult to decipher between these two things, and it is one of the main confusions out there, and I submit that this is exactly where the notion of inalienable rights comes from, is natural law as opposed to the law of nature, law of God. God says don't sell your rights. Bible says that. It says don't ever take any false gods, magistrates, kings, presidents, laws, system of the Bible is your only law. So why would the law of nature tell you that you have inalienable rights, sellable rights? It wouldn't. It does not. This is a concept of man, i.e. the Roman jurists, and it goes all the way back to the ancient Greek. A system of rules and principles for the guidance of human conduct. Human. Not the conduct of man, but of human. Human conduct. That is conduct belonging to humans. Humans are unregenerate public entities like we are. The big difference between human and man, okay? Independently of enacted law or of the systems peculiar to any one people might be discovered by the rational intelligence of man and would be found to grow out of and confirmed his nature, meaning by that word, his whole mental, moral, and physical constitution. Now, again, his nature, that's man's nature, not God's nature. See, you see the difference, and I'm the reason I'm stressing this so much is because the major point here, the major point of contention between what they call the natural law and what is said to be the law of nature is that belonging to concept of. Okay, one is a creation of man to fit his legal systems, to cause men to sell their rights. And I'll explain that in a minute, why that is. One is the complete opposite. In other words, natural law says your rights are inalienable. The law of nature, the law of God, says your rights are unalienable. These are the difference between these two things. But the biggest difference is that the natural law says man can be sovereign. The law of nature, the law of God, in other words, says that only God is sovereign and that man is under God. You see the difference. This is why the Bible says, take no other gods before me, i.e. referring to the law of nature. Nature itself, that which sustains you, the unchangeable existence that is life itself. Do not take any other gods before me. Me being a metaphorical word meaning the universe, the law of nature, the law of God. These laws are not dissimilar. It is that the natural law, and you're not going to like when I say this, the natural law is an expression that Mark Passio uses. He's a Satanist. He says he's an ex-Satanist, but he is a Satanist. I stayed in his house. This is the law that the anarchist will use. This is the term that the lawless will use. This is a term that everyone else will use. And unfortunately, that has crossed over into the realm of those who mean to say law of nature, but instead profess the quote-unquote natural law. One is of man, one is of God. And that is the great, great divide. That is the great difference. Because you see, if your rights come from God, they are a gift to you and to you only. They are not meant to be sold. If your rights come from man, and they are strictly based on reason, then they are yours. You are the sovereign. You can sell them. You can choose. You see, this is the great difference. And this is why I'm always saying there is no such thing as the sovereignty of men. Only corporations. Who's the sovereign of England? The Crown Corporation, which extends a piece of jewelry and places it on top of a mortal man, giving him an immortal office. When that man dies, another replaces him, and the office stays immortal. It is a corporation. And this is why you're not supposed to respect corporations according to the Bible. A corporation is a person. Do not respect persons in any way, shape, or form. That includes each other. When we say, I am this and I am that, I am doctor this, I am esquire this. No, I don't respect that. You're a man, nothing more, nothing less. You cannot say that you're something that you are not. It is when we respect those things that we fall under this realm of legalism. It gives rights where rights don't exist. Political rights are fiction. Natural rights are real, of God. They're negative. That means you have the right not to be messed with. Political rights say, yes, you have the right to be put in pain, taxed, punished, licensed, and extorted, exacted. You see the difference. You see, it's a subtle difference. It's a very difficult difference to see. But because I was asked this question and caught off guard, to where I didn't have all these sources in front of me, I'm now answering that question. And I hope that the person who asks me this question hears this. Hey, come over to the light side. Come over to the light side. You're forgiven. And that's the beautiful thing. Everybody can come over. But see, we don't require anything except for you to live in the truth over here. But for this system that you're supporting, that you're in, that you have to make a positive effort, a belief system that is not based on love, just a false belief, a false paradigm, a false logic. Well, you're required to live a lie. You're required to believe in things that aren't real. You're required to act in ways that require a persona, a fiction. Come over to the light side. Come back over. Come on. Come be what you always have been. That's all we're asking. Come back to nature. Come back to God. It's the same thing. What is the difference between the natural law and the law of nature? Those are the big differences. One is of man, one is of God. One says unalienable, the other says inalienable. And this is why the United States says your rights are inalienable, because it refers to the natural law, and it literally can't see or recognize or touch those who are under the law of nature, the law of God. That is the point. You are either under the law of God or you're under government law. That will always be the case. The whole point is that those who are unseen, those who do not attach themselves, sell their rights, and accept others as property from government cannot be seen. Now, am I saying, I know what certain people are saying out there, those who just cannot come out of their dark hole. Oh, he thinks that people are immune if they believe in God, or he thinks that people are untouchable. No. Folks, what is freedom? What is true freedom? We know what political freedom is. It's called a franchise. You're in it. You're a rat in a cage. You're in an open-air prison called citizenship. Great. Wonderful. Good for you. I'm talking about true freedom. What is true freedom? No cage, no jurisdiction, nature itself. That is freedom. What exists there that exists in the political realm? Absolutely nothing. There's no money there. There's no valuation. There's no time. There's nothing. There's no persons. There is no court. There is nothing there. And you know what else there is not? There are no guarantees. There are no safeties. There is no danger, because danger means the jurisdiction of a state. There is absolutely nothing of the legal world that you are used to, that you are seeking, and that you will sell your natural rights, God-given rights for, and have, whether knowingly or unknowingly, tacitly or expressly. You must understand that when you're talking about freedom, that means freedom from all protection, freedom from all safety, freedom from all insurance. There is not any of that. All you have is, well, faith in God, faith in God's law, and faith in each other, because you are part of what is collectively known as Jehovah, existence itself. See, I understand this now. And the one thing that's going to keep people from being ever being free is just that. Exactly what the Bible says they will destroy you with, which is peace and security. Safety, peace, security, everything that the Pope and the United Nations promises. Everything that these political bodies are promising is what the Bible says that, quote unquote, they will use to destroy you, your adversaries. This is why freedom has nothing to do with that. Clint thinks that if you're a believer in God, you can go around and you're invincible and they can't touch you. Absolutely not. If government becomes a dictatorship, if they want to come kill you, they're going to come kill you. That is the case whether you're a citizen or not. Don't get me wrong, okay? There is no safety or protection in either realm. What they're talking about is money, mammon. It's false security. A police officer's job is to protect and serve government. It doesn't say to protect and serve you. It's to protect government against you, to protect the interests of government, which means exacting and extorting you in every way possible as revenue collection agencies and agents. That is their job. Some of them don't probably realize that, but that's what it is. So what's the difference? We've just covered the difference. So I want to go in and I want to discover, well, okay, we know the source of what we call the law of nature. We know it's the Bible. The government recognizes that. I've read definitions that describe that before we understand that the Bible is the source or foundation, I should say, that the initial maxim of law comes from the Bible. That is it. Okay, it's well recognized. But what is this concept of natural law? How did these two terms become so intermixed when they're in fact so different? Well, because government, as Rivero said, government couldn't do shit unless it gave you inalienable rights, took away what it said in the Declaration of Independence about rights being of God, i.e. unalienable. That's the only way they can be unalienable. See, the word belief, by the way, means to be in love. You go look up the word L-I-E-F or L-I-E-V-E in, say, Webster's Dictionary, 1828. You're going to find that leave and leaf means to be in love. It means love, to be in love. What does that mean, to be in love? Is that the same as believing? Oh, I believe that God exists in the form of a burning bush. No, it's not the same thing. Belief is not real. In the concept that we understand it in our common vulgar language, the dumbed down language, belief is something that can happen for, I believe in dragons, I believe in fairies, I believe in unicorns, and I believe in the devil. All right? Love is a completely different concept. When you love God, that means you love everything. That is what belief means. You love everything, even those things which scare you, the spiders and the horrible things. You love what is nature without fear of man. You fear only the consequences of what man can do to nature, and therefore you follow the law of God, not the law of man. You love. That's the difference. between the common vulgar term and the higher term, as they call it, the king's language. So, let us go to the history here, since we have just a little bit of time left. But let's discover, where did this stuff come from? Now, I'm going to do something that I don't usually do. I'm just going to read from a Wikipedia page. The reason I'm reading from this Wikipedia page is because when I scroll down to the multiple sources, there are quite a few. There's a bibliography, and they are all the names that I recognize as Emma Goldman, Pierre Joseph Proudhon, from What is Property. You know, these are all guys in the anarchist French Revolutionary movement, which again is the same movement that empowered the authors of the Declaration of Independence. It was not original thought. Michael Sandel, David Ellerman, G.A. Cohen. So whoever wrote this up is very, 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 very well educated in this. It includes the Bolsheviks and the workers' control, the state and counter-revolution, Conversation with Noam Chomsky, wage slave, the term, Oscar Wilde, etc., The Soul of Man Under Socialism. There's von Mises, Ludwig von Mises, Work and Wages, and Human Action. These are all very, very important authors in this realm of quote-unquote natural law, which in this case, Susan Brown, The Politics of Individualism, Liberalism, Liberal Feminism, and Anarchy, right? So what is this called? It's called self-ownership. This is the self-ownership at en.m.wikipedia.org. Self-ownership. So I'm just going to read this because, again, all this is sourced. It is on par with all of my research, and it is the exact distinction between the law of God, which we call the law of nature, and the law of man, which we call the natural law, the law of the reasoning of man. But remember, reason is only good as your logic is only good as your grammar. Long is what you know is the limit of your reasoning. This is why they call the law of God is the unwritten law. It is not to be known in that way, and that's a very poetic. How whatever word you want to put on there, spiritual concept. It's called the spiritual law. It is not of the realm of men. Self-ownership is the title. Self-ownership, or the sovereignty of the individual, individual sovereignty, or individual autonomy, is the concept of property in one's own person. Remember, the person and the man are not the same thing. You must differentiate between the person, where these so-called rights are attached to, and the man. It's almost like your soul, as if you could sell your soul, and that's why they call it selling out, selling your soul. It's almost like you're selling your abilities, your ability. Yeah, I mean, Cain and Abel, right? You're selling your ability to do things under God and saying, I'll accept certain benefits in exchange for giving that up. So you're treating your own person, your own self, your ego, if you will, your id entity, your identity, as a persona that can be sold. Expressed as the moral or natural right of a person to have bodily integrity and be the exclusive controller of one's own body and life. Exclusive controller. Right? What is the difference between that and the law of nature? The law of nature says you belong to God. You are a creation of God. That is the difference here, folks. Because you're claiming yourself, you can easily be conquered. You are smart enough. You are wise enough. You have the knowledge, all the knowledge in the world, so you can't be defeated if you're self-owned, right? Well, is that why we're in the predicament we're in? Because we think we're so smart that we have the responsibility and power and knowledge to self-own, to break away from God, break away from our very source, our nature, and say, hey, I'm a free agent? See, this is what was being promoted. This is the godlessness aspect of the law of nature. It turns it into the natural law. Self-ownership is a central idea in several political philosophies that emphasize individualism, such as liberalism and anarchism. The self. Discussion of the boundary of self with respect to ownership and responsibility has been explored by legal author Mayor Dan Cohen in his essays on the value of ownership and responsibility and the boundaries of the self. The emphasis of this work is in illuminating the phenomenology of ownership and our common usage of personal pronouns to apply to both body and property. Where have we heard that before? Personal pronouns, right? What is the whole idea of having 50 different personal pronouns that we're supposed to respect now? Because we're pretending like we are the sovereign. We are gods. We are self-owned. We are self-creators. I'm going to recreate myself in my own image. You see the difference? And you know what? Government's very happy to oblige. It's going to give you that political right. It's not a natural right to say I am a man when I'm a woman. That is not a natural right. That is not a right that a free man would ever choose. Because in order to establish that right in any way, since it cannot be established in nature, what your sex is self-evident. What your gender is self-evident. It cannot be changed. I'm sorry. The surgeries of man will never change the actual body. It will give you the appearance. It will do many things, but it will never make it real. The only way that you can make it, quote unquote, real, as in real estate, property, is to legally say it exists. And this is why they say legal is anti-God, anti-nature, and is in fact anti-law. Legalism is truly anarchy against God's law, the law of nature. Truly organized lawlessness. Personal pronouns to apply to both body and property. This serves as the folk basis for legal conceptions and debates about responsibility and ownership. Another view holds that labor is alienable. This is how wage slavery was set up instead of regular slavery, because it can be contracted out. Your labor can be sold, thus alienating it from the self. Why can you be sued? Hey, I worked this many hours. You haven't paid me. You owe me this money, because my labor has become property of the state, or property of the corporation, which is property of the state. In this view, the choice of a person to voluntarily sell oneself into slavery is also preserved, protected by the principle of self-ownership. The law of nature would never allow yourself, your person, yourself, to put yourself into slavery to another. You're a slave to God and no other. You're a slave to nature. But with this concept of the natural law, it covers voluntarily, which we all have done, selling yourself into slavery. That is what citizenship is. That is why the 13th Amendment says involuntary slavery and servitude are now outlawed, but not voluntary. Anybody can volunteer. Are you starting to see the difference? Whereas in the law of nature, absolutely not. You are 100% in love and property of God and no other. When I say property, folks, by the way, what does that mean? When I say your children are your only real property, what do I mean when I say that? This has to do with husbandry. Husbandry has to do with land. It has to do with everything, livestock, people, whatever. Husbandry is the true taking care of the land. It is also, it means that you're wed to the land. That's why they call it husband and wife. Property, when I say something, when I say oxygen is a property of water, can that be denied? Does that mean that hydrogen owns the oxygen? Oh, no, of course not. Does that mean that water owns the oxygen? Absolutely not. The oxygen can break free in many ways. There is no ownership implied when the word property is used. When I say it's a property of something, I mean, that's where it comes from. I mean, it is the source. I mean, the source of something is a property. It's property. You see, this is the real meaning of the term. A peculiar quality of anything, that which is inherent in a subject or naturally essential to it. This is not legalism when I say it. This is the concept, same thing. I'm a property of God. When I say I'm property of God, it means that is my source. I'm not saying it actually owns me in a legal contract. I'm saying that's where I come from. I must respect it as my source, my Father, my God, my Creator, right? That is the point. Whereas a person is created by the United States, has nothing to do with God. So if I'm accepting a person, I'm doing it voluntarily, and I'm breaking with the law of nature, which says respect no persons. This is the essential difference. An acquired or artificial quality. That which is given by art or bestowed by man is property. It's a quality or disposition. And of course, it goes into property rights and legal stuff, your estate, the thing owned. But you see the difference between the natural concept, which, again, carbon is a property of diamonds, or diamonds are a property of carbon. Carbon is a property of this, and that is a property of God, etc., etc., etc. If I go into government, then I'm being invested. I'm being vested with qualities that didn't exist before and still don't exist. They're artificial, but they're respected. And see, that's the problem. Is why the Bible says respect no other law, respect no other persons, respect no other gods, to take as one's own or to appropriate, etc., etc., etc. Now, I really want you to understand that unalienable rights means you cannot voluntarily sell yourself into slavery. This is why every state constitution says inalienable rights. They had to switch it up. And as I said, the reason they did that is because that was the revolutionary spirit of the time from people like Trudeau, whatever his name was. These guys, they know what my belief, they know what they're doing. My belief, this is all a scam. My belief is that the founding fathers knew exactly what they were doing. They knew exactly what they were doing when they created the Constitution. They created the Declaration of Independence, which has no political standing whatsoever. It simply is a declaration. It's not a law. It means nothing. It has nothing to do with anything. It cannot be referenced as anything in a court. You cannot use it. It's simply not usable as anything. The Constitution is the law of the land, not the Declaration of Independence. Constitution does not say anything about having God-given or unalienable rights. In fact, I don't even think it mentions the word God or Jesus Christ. Okay, that's not what this was created. This was created for those who will sell their rights and receive political ones and become the voluntarily slaves of the United States, or at the time, regular slaves. And as we said, slavery almost became permanent. It almost became, by law, signed by both houses and signed by the president, it almost became perpetual in this nation. We could have very well grown up in a slave state. Labor markets and private property for anarchist political philosopher L. Susan Brown. Liberalism and anarchism are two political philosophies that are fundamentally concerned with individual freedom, yet differ from one another in very distinct ways. Anarchism shares with liberalism a radical commitment to individual freedom while rejecting liberalism's competitive property relations, i.e. socialism, right? Scholar Ellen Meiksins Wood said that there are doctrines of individualism that are opposed to Lockean individualism, and non-Lockean individualism may encompass socialism. Right libertarian. I've often told you that the roots of libertarianism are actually Satanism. Most people don't believe that, even though you can verify that. You can see who the guys that started it were. Right libertarian conceptions of self-ownership extend the concept to include control of private property as part of the self. According to G.A. Cohen, The libertarian principle of self-ownership says that each person enjoys over himself and his own powers full and exclusive rights of control and use, and therefore owes no service or product to anyone else that he is not contracted to supply. Well, who's going to protect that? Where's the protection coming? It's not of God. God doesn't protect you because yourself. It's not about the self. So there's no natural law, i.e. law of nature behind you. So what is this? Where does it come from? Where, if you are referring to nature, when you say law, how can you say that nature is not a quote unquote part, at least, of God? Where is the authority? What authority? Yourself? What possible authority does yourself have when a frickin' army is coming your way? This is simply not recognized and never will be recognized. And if it is, let me rephrase that. It is being recognized. Our whole system is built on this. That's why it's so fucked up. That is why everything is so fucked up right now. Because it's all about the self. Nobody lives to support God, which means to support your fellow man as well. To support nature, to support that which sustains you. No, everything's about the self. Okay, you're never going to have any kind of true freedom when all you care about is the self. When all power comes from the self. It just doesn't work. There's nothing behind it. It's empty. Philosopher Ian Shapiro says that labor markets affirm self-ownership. Well, that should tell you a lot. In other words, capitalism affirms self-ownership. And of course, that's why the communists created labor unions. Because if self-ownership were not recognized, then people would not be allowed to sell the use of their productive capabilities to others. Yeah, what does that mean? It would mean that, as the Bible said, we'd be charitable and love each other. Oh, that would be horrible. He says that the individual sells the use of his productive capacity for a limited time and conditions, but continues to own what he earns from selling the use of that capacity and the capacity itself. Again, you're selling your rights, inalienable rights, thereby retaining sovereignty over himself while contributing to economic efficiency. The common view within classical liberalism is that sovereign-minded individuals usually assert a right of private property external to the body. External. Reasoning that if a person owns themselves, really? You own yourself. They own their actions, including those that create or improve resources. Therefore, they own their own labor and the fruits thereof. Now, is this in any way compatible with the law or laws of nature? Absolutely not. There's not one animal out there that says, I own myself or is capable of it. In human action, quote unquote, Austrian school economist Ludwig von Mises argues that labor markets are the rational conclusion of self-ownership and argues that collective ownership of labor ignores differing values for the labor of individuals. He says, of course, people believe that there is an essential difference between the tasks incumbent upon the comrades of the socialist commonwealth and those incumbent upon slaves or serfs. The slaves and serfs, they say, toiled for the benefit of an exploiting lord. But in a socialist system, the product of labor goes to society, of which the toiler himself is a part. Here, the worker works for himself, as it were. So working for another is working for yourself. Not having anything to do with what you do at work is working for yourself. Why? Because you're trading your labor for money. Does that really sound good? Do you wonder why corporations are so wealthy while you're so poor, even though you're doing all the work? That's what this is about. What this reasoning overlooks is that the identification of the individual comrades and the totality of all comrades within the collective entity pocketing the produce of all work is merely fictitious. Whether the ends which the community's office holders are aiming at or disagree with the wishes and desires of the various comrades is of minor importance. The main thing is that the individual's contribution to the collective entity's wealth is not requited in the shape of wages determined by the market. You're working for a piece of paper. You're not getting food. You're not getting anything actually of yourself, of your hard work. You're not harvesting anything. You're not building anything for yourself. And yet this is called self-ownership. You see, it's trick. It's word magic. Self-ownership means selling yourself. That's... Can you not see it? Can you not see that is Satanism? That is adversarial to God's law, or the law of nature, which says, no, you cannot sell your rights. You cannot sell yourself. You're property of God. You cannot just say, okay, you're not my master anymore. Okay? You cannot be free if you're selling yourself. You're selling your soul. You're selling what you do as property. It's so obvious, and yet how confused are we that the natural law is the correct path? We don't realize we've been tricked. We don't realize our language was designed to deceive. Nevertheless, there can be defense of self-ownership, which can be critical of the idea of private property, specifically within anarchism. The anarchistic Oscar Wilde said that for the recognition of private property has really harmed individualism and obscured it by confusing a man with what he possesses. It has led individualism entirely astray. As I said, anarchism at some point had a purpose. It does not. It sells t-shirts and gets people together to basically do commerce, which is the absolute opposite of what anarchism should be. And this is, of course, why major corporation holders also call themselves anarchists. It's profitable, folks. You can't have a corporation and be an anarchist. It's an oxymoron. I'm completely under the corporate code, the U.S. code, and every other law that applies to me in the law of nations, and yet I'm an anarchist. It has made gain, not growth, its aim. What is the difference between gain and growth, folks? Think about it. When one grows spiritually, one actually starts losing possessions. That's the difference. Gain and growth. So that man thought that the important thing was to have, and did not know that the important thing is to be. The true perfection of man lies not in what man has, but in what man is. With the abolition of private property, then, we shall have true, beautiful, healthy individualism. Nobody will waste his life in accumulating things and the symbols for things. One will live. To live is the rarest thing in the world. Most people exist. That is all. Unquote. Also, Italian individualist anarchist Renzo Novatore said that only ethical and spiritual wealth is invulnerable. This is the true property of individuals. The rest, no. The rest is vulnerable, and all that is vulnerable will be violated. Now, you can see how they're mixing the concepts of the law of God, law of nature, with man-made natural law. They're mixing concepts that cannot be mixed. You cannot have a law system based strictly on reason and logic and then also bring in spiritual concepts, because the spiritual concepts have to have God behind them. Otherwise, they have no purpose. They are not of man. They are not written. They are not enforceable, as government says. And that's the important part. Moral laws, folks, they're not enforceable. Government cannot force you to be moral. It can only force you to follow its law, which is, again, man-made. And its law can only be enforced if you sell your rights. If you abandon nature, abandon God. If you abandon God, you abandon all concepts of natural rights, the law of nature. It's a puzzle. I'm not asking you to believe in God. I'm not asking you to do anything. I'm asking you to understand how the system works. If those out there who are listening to this are still seriously saying that this is coming from me, and that you don't understand that everything I do is to try to explain, quote unquote, their outlook, their definitions, those who control you, who rule you, even though you call yourself an anarchist, those who rule you, this is their perspective. But it's also the perspective of the Bible. It's not Clint Richardson's perspective. I gave up my ego a long time ago. And I forgive you. Let me just say that. I forgive all my detractors, for they, just like Christ, man, you guys don't know what you're saying. You have no idea what you're saying. You're saying things without knowledge. Forgive them for what they say, for they know not what they speak. I forgive you. And I find that forgiveness for these kind of people pisses them off royally, because you're not taking their bait. You're not biting their hook. But I sincerely mean it. With anarchism, the concept of wage slavery refers to a situation perceived as quasi-voluntary slavery, where a person's livelihood depends on wages, especially when the dependence is total and immediate. It is a negatively connotated term used to draw an analogy between slavery and wage labor by focusing on similarities between owning and renting a person. God says don't respect persons. If you don't respect a person, you can't sell it. You don't imagine that you have a person, especially one that is detachable, and especially one, this identity that can be stolen, which certainly tells you it's not your own. Identity theft. How can you have identity theft under God? You can't. Because you have no credit, you have no money, you have nothing. You are nothing. And that's what the Bible says. Do not pretend to be something when you are no thing. Do you know how important that is? The term wage slavery has been used to criticize economic exploitation and social stratification, with the former seen primarily as unequal bargaining power between labor and capital, particularly when workers are paid comparatively low wages, as in sweatshops, and the later as a lack of workers' self-management, fulfilling job choices and leisure in an economy. With the advent of the Industrial Revolution, thinkers such as Proudhon and Marx elaborated the comparison between wage labor and slavery in the context of a critique of social property not intended for active personal use, while Luddites emphasized the dehumanization brought about by machines. Emma Goldman famously denounced wage slavery by saying, quote, "The only difference is that you are hired slaves instead of block slaves." Looks like that's about all the time we have. It goes on within left libertarian scholars such as Hillel Steiner, Peter Valentine, and Henry George, etc. Left libertarians, quote, maintain that the world's natural resources were initially unowned or belonged equally to all men, that is, not persons, and it is illegitimate for anyone to claim exclusive private ownership of these resources to the detriment of others. Again, that can only be backed by the fact that it's property of God, i.e. nature, i.e. existence, etc., etc. Such private appropriation is legitimate only if everyone can appropriate an equal amount, or if those who appropriate more are taxed, etc., etc., etc. Those who would appropriate more are obviously not following the law of nature. That is the point. It is, and by the way, remember, atheism is ridiculous. Atheism says, I don't believe in the existence of existence. Right? I don't believe in existence. I don't believe in God. God is defined as existence. All that is, all that shall be, all that was, right? The universe as it is right now, as it shall be. And yet you don't believe in it. You don't believe in God, which is defined as existence. Literally, an atheist is defined as someone who does not believe in the existence of existence. All right? That's how foolish this concept is, and this is exactly where it comes from. This kind of idiocratic thinking. This is where it comes from. This is all designed to take you away from the very thing that would give you true natural freedom, freedom in nature, under God, within the confines of God, which is nature. This is it, folks. This is the difference. I hope that this helps make sense of it all, the difference between the two terms, and why it is that we should use the proper term. The proper term is law of nature. Law belonging to nature. Nature, of course, belongs to God. or is God, depending how you interpret the definition of Jehovah. With that, I bid you adieu, and I thank you for listening. You're in UCY.TV, and this has been Red Pill Sunday School. Thank you very much. Take care, folks. I'm trying to get Daniel hooked up for a live show in the coming new year. Hopefully that'll be next week. Be well, folks. Take care.